Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. I really am grateful to see everyone for this second plenary of the morning. We're pleased to welcome Connie LaSalle and Gema Howell from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, better known as NIST. We invited them to discuss NIST IR 8481, Cybersecurity for Research Findings and Possible Paths Forward. I'll put a link to that in the chat so that everyone can follow along. This report is now open for comment, and as soon as it came out, I got in touch with them to see if they would be willing to join us, and they were able to do so even on very short notice. So we're very grateful, and hopefully you'll be able to help give them a very warm welcome to the FDP. Connie LaSalle is the Senior Policy Advisor at NIST, where her portfolio covers a wide range of critical and emerging technologies. She is a contributor to several publications and is one of the co-leads of NIST's Cybersecurity for Research project. Prior to joining NIST, Connie led the Federal Customer Service Success Team at a DC-based data protection startup. She also served as the lead policy advisor to the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. Department of Justice and led several cybersecurity and IT modernization initiatives within the White House Office of Management and Budget. Beyond her government service, Connie brings several years of industry experience with her to NIST and holds a graduate degree in public policy. Gema Howell is a computer scientist in the Applied Cybersecurity Division at NIST. She is co-lead of NIST's Cybersecurity Research Project and has contributed to the research and development of NIST Interagency Report 8481, Cybersecurity for Research Findings and Possible Paths Forward, which we're about to discuss. Gema has also developed various publications aimed at improving cybersecurity standards. Her work includes providing guidance for securing mobile and Internet, IoT, Internet of Things devices, especially for first responders, creating reference architectures for secure enterprise mobile deployments, including bring your own device solutions, which we're all very interested in, and offering enterprise guidance for a secure mobile infrastructure. In addition, Gema played a key role as the cybersecurity lead on NIST's voting team, contributing to the development of voluntary voting system guidelines 2.0 and drafting its accompanying technical requirements. So please help me in providing a warm welcome. And I know you both cannot see all of the people who are here with us today, so I'll have to share the enthusiasm on my end. I'll go off screen until you're done, and then we'll all come back to facilitate the Q&A at the end of your presentation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, and nice to not see everybody, but know that you're around. I'm Connie, and this is Gema, and I think we can go ahead and get started with a little bit of background. So I'm sure most of you or all of you are familiar with the CHIPS and Science Act, which was signed into law just over 2 years ago, which included the NIST for the Future Act. And in this particular Division B, Title II, Section 10229 requirement that really brings the focus on research cybersecurity today, there was a particular task for NIST to focus on the dissemination of resources for research institutions. Now, there were a ton of caveats. I'm framing this at a high level, but effectively it directed NIST to disseminate and make publicly available resources to help institutions of higher education in receipt of in excess of $50 million per year in federal research funding. And specifically, these resources are intended to help to identify, assess, manage, and reduce cybersecurity risk related to conducting research. The statute laid out some criteria to guide us as we identified resources. Generally speaking, these should be generally applicable and usable by a wide range of what they consider to be qualifying institutions, vary with the nature and size of qualifying institutions, including taking a look at the sensitivity and relative nature of the data being used or collected. It should also include elements that promote awareness of basic, simple controls It should promote a workplace cybersecurity culture, really in service of the growing need to look at cybersecurity supply chain risk management. Taking a look at third-party stakeholder relationships was something they called out. It also called out just to give us a better understanding of the kinds of resources, because resource, that can be everything from infrastructure to a documented spec. It provided suggested examples such as case studies, scenarios of the practical application of various guidance documents. And I'm not going to keep reading through all these bullets, but in general, be related to international technical standards. Next slide. So thinking about how we wanted to implement this requirement, what we understand, because we work a lot with federal agencies, industry, and often academia, was that just adding another layer of burden was not going to be helpful at all. And that because of the diversity of research areas served by academic institutions within this scope, we probably weren't going to be able to put together a one-size-fits-all guidance document. But we wanted to double check some of those assumptions. So we started with engaging the people who would be implementing whatever we put out. We did some direct engagement. I know it says 20 institutions and associations, but note that through the associations, we probably reached far more institutions than just the initial 20 that we interacted with. We also put out a request for comment without any kind of guidance document like the NIST that was mentioned before. That was posted and kept open from April to June of last year. And we wanted basic input from anybody who would give it, whether you were a chief information security officer at a large R1 institution, or you were a compliance officer trying to understand all of the different requirements being imposed upon you through the latest interesting grant that one of your research teams wanted to compete for. We also wanted to hear from people directly, so we set up some one-on-one meetings at this point to educate ourselves and bring ourselves up to speed on the variety of issues in this space related to the instantiation of cybersecurity programs, hopefully that are risk-based, but that at minimum are keeping with the requirements that you're being held to through things like federal grants. And then we also wanted to make space for virtual group discussions, so we had a couple of those. And what we wanted to do was ground each of those engagements in a common set of questions. So with that, I will pass the proverbial mic to Gema to talk about the approach that we took.
Thank you. Yeah, so with the April 2020 request for comment, we had the set of key questions. Like Connie said, it was kind of open to any feedback related to the topic that we were covering, but we did have some specific questions that I'll run through now. First, just being, kind of level setting, what are the common cybersecurity challenges and risks that your institutions face when conducting research? The second, are there any unique cybersecurity challenges and risks, maybe related to a specific research area? Then we asked, how are you currently addressing your cybersecurity risks? What resources are you using to do that? Are there any NIST resources that you're using? Are there any other resources that you're using? And then your thoughts on we asked for thoughts on the existing resources. Are they sufficient and effective? And then close out with what new resources would be helpful to address those challenges and risks that were mentioned above. What role might NIST play in providing those resources, and who should be involved, or who should we work with in the development of those resources? So after all of our engagement, the request for comment, we gathered all of our feedback, all of the feedback that we received, and we put it into the NIST IR 8481. initial public draft. And we really took our time kind of going through what we heard from the different institutions, from the virtual group discussions, the specifics, things that were outlined when people submitted written input from the request for comment. And so we wanted to share that through this document. And I'll pass it back to Connie to go over some of the specifics findings.
Thanks. So on this slide, you're seeing the common 6 thematic areas that were touched on when we asked that first question, what common cybersecurity risk management challenges and cybersecurity risks do you come across? There was actually one quote from a response to the request for comment that captures one of the largest issue areas, which is, separate from any kind of vulnerability management, incident response, or threat mapping that we might focus on. The quote was, "Our normal operations work in a deficit of funding and people." And that alone seems to be a risk in and of itself that's worth touching on. So you'll see that sort of touched on both in the workforce category and the limited cyber budget category. But I think the going in assumption here that was validated, at least for us, was that much like other industries or other sectors, insufficient resourcing is a risk. So just want to call that out. Also, general cybersecurity awareness seemed to be lacking across both researchers and administrators. And the cost of entry to gain that knowledge remains high, given the amount of time required to learn and the lack of tailored trainings that are available. And also that there are limited incentives for researchers to bridge the awareness gap just short of missing out on a funding opportunity or a collaboration opportunity. You'll see culture clash mentioned here. That might be a curt or not as nuanced way of explaining this concept to you all, but what this basically illustrates from our understanding is that there's a compliance culture that can permeate admin teams in place of a risk management one. When you just have so much going on, you don't have enough resources, you tend to focus on what's the minimum I have to do. And in parallel, centralized enterprise IT security management approaches don't necessarily always translate well to meet the needs of highly distributed research environments. So getting back to one of our going in assumptions, which was that a one-size-fits-all cybersecurity set of requirements imposed through research agreements would probably inhibit the efficient allocation of resources more than it would actually help to clarify requirements. We definitely heard that back at the staff and sometimes leadership level. Beyond this, something that we're all facing with right now is the rapid pace of innovation. I talk about AI more in my day-to-day than I ever was even 2 years ago. And I was working on an AI risk management project at the time. But it just goes to show you how quickly this landscape can shift, how quickly the context of what matters shifts, and the importance of taking a more nuanced approach to this stuff. So let's switch to the next slide, which gets into the second question we asked, which is, what are some of the unique challenges and risks you're dealing with? We hear you on budget and people and the rapid pace of innovation, but what are some of those areas that your research programs are engaging in, and you're seeing unique stuff that seems a little bit more like an edge case? We had these types of research pop up for us as areas that have unique considerations. And the specific challenges and risks that are arising from these fields that motivated them to pop up for people include the handling of specialized, sensitive, or regulated data, including protected health information, controlled unclassified information, and data related to ITAR, which might require additional controls reporting or education regarding what data handling looks like. We also heard that there's a need for interinstitutional and international collaboration, which may require additional investments in identity and access management tools, for example, to appropriately support research while protecting confidentiality. We also heard that one of the considerations that comes up is the distributed accountability for cybersecurity, which is then reinforced through research agreement language and institutional processes, politics, and cultures, the unique characteristics and configurations of the research equipment involved, and the lack of secure storage and other tools that meet regulatory and contractual requirements. And finally, sort of doubling down on that initial point that there's a lack of institutional capacity to support required research tools. So I'm sure you have lots of questions about that, but I'd encourage you to look at this section of the NIST because it was really quite interesting to see what came up for folks. And then I think the next slide is back to Gema to go over the suggestions that were provided to us for future work.
Yeah, during our discussions, we heard a lot of feedback, not only on, on different types of resources that would be helpful in this area for research and cybersecurity related. Starting with targeted resources, these would be cybersecurity resources that are specifically tailored to the research community. And maybe even apply to particular fields like some of the unique ones Connie mentioned earlier. Collaborative engagements, collaboration with existing research communities and government entities to help kind of bolster information sharing, innovation, and efficient problem solving. Trainings, this could be trainings for the research security workforce, but also maybe trainings to raise awareness of the importance of cybersecurity, to motivate researchers to kind of work with cybersecurity officers and ensure limited impact on their research experiments. Framework guidance, they did not ask for more frameworks. They just wanted further development of existing frameworks. So institutional planning and implementation that could kind of help support research cybersecurity services. Security compliance and grant guidance. This would be effective grant writing guidance that kind of takes into consideration security, compliance, and research environments that would be hosted at higher education institutions. And then finally, shared services report. Shared services support. So establishing programs and services that can help the cybersecurity needs or inform of services that are available that can be shared. Funding organizations can also help manage the common research infrastructure. So that was another area of interest. So those were kind of feedback that we heard about in general of what could help in this area. And from our discussions in the document, you'll see we kind of outline some potential next steps, specifically that NIST might play a role in. The first section being community-specific cybersecurity resources, maybe helping tailor our resources to research security. Maybe something higher level at a profile area for research security, or also maybe something that's more specific for a specific field of study. In the coordination area, maybe coordinate with federal agencies to make sure there's consistent application of NIST guidance and support for collaboration with higher education, research communities. We're all about engaging with the community. And so we're used to, hosting discussions and being involved with different groups. And then capacity building, maybe supporting those trainings that folks are looking for, and then looking at our NIST program and seeing where they may be able to help in building the capacity in research cybersecurity. And to talk about some more recent guidance that came out, I'll pass it back to Connie.
Yeah, that brings me to maybe one of the elephants in the room, which is this latest guidance from OSTP, which has a series of requirements. I don't need to read the document to you all here. I'm sure you've read it once or twice before, but we wanted to acknowledge that this includes additional layers of policy on top of what the Chips and Science Act called for. Ultimately, we've excerpted the most critical piece here, which relates to what this refers to as one single resource, but really our interpretation of Chips and Science is to offer, you know, as many voluntary resources as are necessary to help you manage risk. We're grateful that OSTP views the NIST cybersecurity program and this initial resource as helpful and impactful to this community. And I think the goal that we share with OSTP is providing maximum flexibility in your use of resources as you're instantiating a cybersecurity risk management program. Next slide. To give you a sense of some of the resources that we've already pointed to in the draft NISTer, I would consider these to fall into two buckets. The first bucket are NIST resources. We wanted to acknowledge those that have been most cited by institutions as being leveraged already, or they are like on the roadmap to be leveraged. We also wanted to cite to cybersecurity risk management guidance that maybe Gema and I know about because we're in NIST, but maybe others are not aware of. Guidance that demonstrates how you can implement a particular piece of guidance or a reference architecture. Excuse me for just 1 minute. Getting over a cold, excuse me. We also wanted to cite to projects that are either ongoing or that have concluded through our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence that have resulted in implementation guidance that could be leveraged. Noting that some institutions will have high performance computing infrastructure that they need to manage, which has a whole suite of security requirements that look very different from managing laptops and other endpoints. We wanted to capture that full breadth of guidance and voluntary resources that we offer. We also acknowledge, though, that the higher education research community has developed resources that it uses that have been impactful for managing cybersecurity risk as well. So you'll see that we've also listed some of those non-NIST resources. And last but not least, just a couple of examples of some of the NIST resources that we've cited to. Our risk management framework is used most often by federal departments and agencies, but we did hear it cited by institutions of higher education that we spoke with as well. Obviously, we have our control catalog that is broadly used and leveraged in other pieces of guidance, that it's 800-53. We are aware that 800-171 is being used, but you'll see that it's not listed here, as that seems to be a sticking point for people that we can talk about. I know that CUI is a big topic of conversation. What our goal is to look at the program level rather than at the data level and provide guidance to help you look across the entire research portfolio to manage risk, not just for CUI. We also pointed to the cybersecurity framework, our privacy framework, one of our quick start guides for ransomware. And then we also wanted to cite to some guidance that we have related to high performance computing security. And I think that's it. We can wrap here, and if there are questions, we'll be available.
Thank you so much for that information. I think it is very interesting for our community. Of course, I just want to remind everyone that you can add your questions into the Q&A, and we will go through them as they come in. I don't know, Alex and Maria, I want to invite you as well if you have questions to be able to ask them.
Sure. Just quickly, so all these resources have been gathered. What are your next steps beyond gathering resources?
Sure.
Outreach, I assume.
Well, we need to finalize the document. That is when the OSTP requirement clock kicks off. So we are intentionally making space for additional conversation, both with federal agencies and institutions of higher education. But yeah, engagement and finalizing the document.
And Connie, there is a question in the chat related to that, which just asks for more information about the time frame for finalizing the NIST IR 8481 document.
Yeah, probably in the coming months. We'll see how the fiscal year wraps up. It's always a fun time with lots of curveballs for us, as I'm sure it is for others. But yeah, in the coming months, I don't have an expected date at this point.
You mentioned coordinating with other agencies. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that process looks like.
Sure. OSTP has convened an interagency group to talk about implementation going forward related to their guidance. I think NIST sees a role not just here related to this NIST IR document, but also insofar as the certification process needs to be implemented. We've made ourselves available to advise on that. Obviously, we would want there to be a really clear nexus with the document that we're rolling out. And we recognize that by taking this very flexible approach, there are probably going to be sticky questions that we have to answer moving forward. So yeah, largely OSTP is convening a group, and to the extent that agencies have questions, we remain open to talk about the document.
Thank you. And there is a question as well. How relevant to this conversation is it that federal grant-making agencies are at different stages or levels of adoption on CUI?
Well, so there's the initial ask of NIST, which is to provide any kind of resource, and then there's the question of implementing. And I would say at that point, NIST is not an oversight agency. We're not an enforcement agency. So at that point, we typically shift into more of an advisory posture to answer questions about the guidance. Also noting that there's 171, and then there are the programs policies and like interagency mechanisms that we don't control. The DoD CMMC program is an example of that, where we draft the guidance, but they ultimately run their program to their liking.
Thank you. Melissa Korf asks, do you anticipate that NIST may develop a set of controls for institutions to use in establishing their cybersecurity programs that is different from 853 or 800-171?
I think for that question, if there is a specific ask or in the future, if we use something like the cybersecurity framework, I mean, right now we list the cybersecurity framework as one of the resources. And so an institution could potentially on their own develop a cybersecurity profile using the information there that would kind of map to the categories and subcategories there, which actually also then align with the 853 controls as well. So I think there are options for folks with the resources that we provide, and one of those being the cybersecurity framework.
Yeah, I think just to double tap on what Gema is saying, I think anything that would be produced as part of this effort would map into the 53 control suite.
I want to mention, and this is for our membership as well as for both of you, tomorrow we have a presentation about the new Carnegie classification system that is coming into effect in 2025. Is that something that you're familiar with and would have taken into account? And just to let you know, the entire landscape of what is considered to be, Research 1 versus Research 2 or research universities is about to change. There's a downward sort of thrust in terms of the minimum expenditures that would be required to be considered to be an R1, which it's the same $50 million threshold. But the question, I think, for you and I think for us to be thinking about as we move forward is, a $50 million enterprise isn't really the same thing as, a $500 million enterprise in terms of the investments that institution may have made or have the capacity to make in infrastructure. I wonder if that's something that you're familiar with, grappling with, if you have guidance for us. I'd just be curious about your reaction to my comment.
Well, I'm still processing, but it's certainly something that came up during our project last year. And it's something that we have tried to handle through maximizing flexibility rather than taking that one-size-fits-all approach. But it's a great point. I was not tracking with the classification system itself was going to change, but I appreciate you bringing that up. And to the extent that you think it warrants a separate conversation, we're open to learning more.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And you're invited to tomorrow's session as well, if it would be useful to you. Maria has a question. Great. Do you want to share that, Maria?
Sure. So the speakers discussed capacity building as a future effort, and I just wanted to mention that FDP membership is very diverse. So we do include, we actually have a working group for our emerging research institutions. Our members also include HBCUs, minority serving institutions. And I just wanted to mention that these types of institutions may need additional support and outreach efforts. They are challenged, and just wanted to point that out as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Would love to talk more with you about ways that FDP could be a partner here. We did in our engagements attempt to reach a number of HBCUs, MSIs, and even in just figuring out how to engage on this topic at this high level, it was evident that it was a challenge for them to engage not just on the policy conversation, but just in a general conversation about what cybersecurity risk management could look like in the future. So definitely attuned to the need and appreciate you making the point.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the membership? If so, I would encourage you, now's your chance. Here is a question from Jennifer Moorhead Farmer. Will these requirements be flowing down to the subcontract award recipients?
Ultimately, I think that would come down to the grant making institution. So I would say that is not one for NIST to take, though I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Other questions? I always like to give people a minute to think and write if they have them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we know that you're available to answer questions above and beyond this meeting. We are kind of stacked right up in sessions. So I don't see other questions. I'm going to go ahead and thank you on behalf of everyone here for this presentation. We really, really appreciate it. And I know that we'll be working hard in this space in the coming weeks and months. For everybody who is here, and again, you can't see our many hundred people on this session, but I know they're very appreciative as well. For our members, we will be reconvening at 1:20 for the federal update. So you'll have a few minutes to go grab a cup of coffee, as I have one right here, and come back. Thank you so much
Thank
to
you so
Connie
much.
and Gemma.
Thank you so much, Connie. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you for having us.
We'll
Thanks
see
for
you
the
all at
time.
1:20. Thank you.